Hey guys, in today's video, I'm gonna break down my latest guitar cover called Golden by HUNTR X. So without further ado, let's get started. All right, so here we have the session. Just a quick overview. First, I have the drums, then a few effects, then the bass and the synths. Then we have the guitars and lead guitar, and all these go to this master bus. These are just VCAs for some volume control for the different groups. So let's start with the drums. Let's go to the chorus. Here's how they sound. So for the drums, I use the Superior Drummer 3, and my go-to drum kit is this Yamaha recording custom from the Death and Darkness expansion pack. It's really versatile and fits a lot of different genres. And the way I have this set up is I route all these different drums out to these aux tracks so that I have all these instruments here under each other. So let's start with the kick. Here's the kick mic. Here's an EQ controlling the lows and cutting that boomy frequency. And then the SSL channel for some more EQ. High pass at 40. Cutting some low mids and mids at 700. And then adding some high end to make it cut through a little bit better. And a tiny bit of compression and some gating. All right, and then I added a sample from Bogren Digital. Sounds like this. So quite fat and roomy. And here's some tiny bit of EQ, just a high pass at 40 hertz. Nothing else. And here's another EQ just to control the lows a little bit more, as well as the clickiness up high. Just to make it a little bit less metal sounding, for the lack of a better term. And these two go to a kick bus here, which has another EQ, which I believe I did quite late in the mix, just to make some tiny moves to make it fit the track a little bit better. So another high pass, low shelf, tiny cut at around 200, and then at 5K. Without. Yeah, just make it a little bit tighter. Then we have the snare mic. With the SSL channel. Boosting quite a bit of 8K. And then at 150 about. Tiny bit of compression and some gating. High pass 100. Then we have the bottom mic, pretty much the same settings. Tiny bit more compression. And then I added a snare sample. This is from a Slate CLA pack. And here's some EQ, adding a ton of low end and a bit of high end. And the snare mics I left completely dry, but then this sample I sent to a gated reverb, as well as a room reverb, and then a plate reverb. And we'll go through the reverb settings later. And then I usually like to add a snare room sample on a separate track. Here's how that sounds. I believe it's from this Slate sample. And this I don't remember from which pack. Here's some EQ, cutting a little bit lows and high pass at 100. And then I'm also sending that to all these reverbs as well. So here's how the snare sounds. Without samples. And all these tracks go to this snare bus, which has a 1176 compressor. To make it a little bit more aggressive and add a bit of sustain. Then we have the decapitator from Sound Toys. I'm driving really hard, but the mix is only at 50%. So it adds even more energy and a bit of sustain. And then lastly, I'm clipping the snare by 3 dB just to control the transients. All right, and then we have the toms. Just some basic EQ. High pass 85 and cutting a ton of mids and adding a bit of presence. I believe all these are pretty much the same. Here on the floor tom, I'm boosting a little bit of 100 hertz. Let's see if I can find a tom fill. Yeah. And all these toms go to this tom bus, which also has this clipper. And from here, I'm sending all these toms to these same reverbs as the snare. Then we have the overheads. Dry. So here's the SSL channel. Cutting some lows and some mids. And then this harsh area. That can be really whistly for cymbals. And then a tiny bit of compression. And usually this is all I do for overheads, but for this mix, I decided to pretty much cut all the other drums out from the overheads and just make them more like a cymbal mic. Without. So I'm basically cutting the kick and a little bit of a snare out of these overheads. And then another EQ just to furthermore uh, control the harshness. And then finally we have the rooms. Again, cutting some lows and highs, and also that harsh area, and a tiny bit of 8K. Just to make them a little bit more darker and less harsh sounding. And then a 1176 compressor. Just to add a little bit more energy to the rooms. And all these drums go to this drum bus, which has a clipper, just a 1 dB for some control. And then I'm sending all these drums equal amount to this parallel compression bus here, which have this Neve style compressor from Arturia. And then also adding a tiny bit of high end in parallel. So without, with, so it obviously has a little bit of volume, but it really makes the drums cut through busy mix like this. Okay, so that's the drums. Then we have these effects, just a few risers and impacts. Here's the intro, for example. And then when the chorus hits, so stuff like that. And just some EQ to tame the sounds, because they can usually be quite heavy in the lows and highs. So I like to tame them a little bit. All right, then we have the bass. Sounds like this, completely dry. And it was recorded with my Squire PJ bass into the fractal, completely dry. And then I added this Bogren bass knob, which is based on a Ampeg SVT. It's on the dirt channel, just to add some saturation. And there's some EQ, high pass at 50, low pass at 11-12K, cutting some 200, and then adding some mids just to make it cut through. Bass guitar usually likes some mids. Without. A bit boomy. Now it's cleaned up. And then my go-to compressor for bass, 1176. And lastly, just a limiter to tame the peaks. Really not doing anything drastic. Okay, and then we have the synths. So first we have this sub bass track here. And it's a preset from Analog Lab from Arturia. Then I'm cutting some super lows and then cutting almost all the highs to make it quite dark. Here's without. With. With the bass guitar. So it adds a nice lower octave from the bass. Then we have this track called Hook. It's basically the intro. And it works as a layer to this guitar that we'll get to later. But it's pretty much the same melody. And that's just a random preset from Anna 2. Actually, no EQ here. And then I added a tremolo from Soundtoys, tremolator, just to add that pulse without it. With. And then we have this ARP bass in the first verse. Another preset from Anna 2, Butter bass. Here's how it sounds dry. So it's a really big sound. So I cut quite a bit of the lows as well as the highs because I already have this sub track. So I don't really need this information here. So it's more like a filtered bass. And here I have this sidechain plugin called Kickstart 2, which adds a pulse as well. Just at 50%. And then a little bit of distortion just to make it cut through a little bit better. Basically for small speakers like a phone or a laptop that really doesn't have the low end information. This distortion makes it cut through much better. And then some cutting in the low mids. Then we have this pad. This was printed from some plugin I can't remember. Sorry for that. But here's the EQ. Just basic high pass. And controlling some of the high end. And a bit of mid cuts here. And that I'm sending to a hall reverb. Then we have this super saw, which is also from Anna 2. And again, high pass at 100, a bit of low pass, and cutting some 200 and 400. Then we have this drone track, which I also can't remember from where I printed that. Sounds like this. It's basically just two notes through the whole track. Again, high pass, low pass. And because it's just a steady drone, I like to add some movement to these kind of tracks. So I added the Pan Man from Sound Toys, which kind of goes from left to right quite subtly. Just to add some subtle movement. And that I'm sending to the whole reverb, as well as the Black Hole by Eventide, which is also a really atmospheric kind of reverb. And then lastly, we have this string track here, which is basically just one note through the whole chorus. And together the synths sound like this. Then we have the rhythm guitars. First we have this clean guitars. Sounds like this. Also very dark and atmospheric. Here's how they sound dry. And these were recorded with my Fractal as well. And I think I first wanted to have this really bright and crispy sounding clean guitars in the verse. But then at some point I just thought that it didn't work. So I made them quite the opposite and really dark, almost like a pad. So here's the EQ, high pass, low pass, quite a bit. And here's the channel strip, even more low pass up to or down to 3K. And then I put a reverb directly on the track at 100%, a whole reverb, 4 seconds. Oh, and these were double tracked, by the way, left and right. So with all the low pass and the reverb at 100%, he makes them really distant and dark sounding. And then I'm sending them both to even more reverb, the Black Hole, and then the whole reverb. Dimension D for some chorus and widening. And lastly, a little bit of dual delay. Yeah, so they act more like a pad than actual guitars. And that worked better for this song. And then we have the main rhythm tracks. Here's completely dry. So these are also recorded with my Fractal FM3. I believe it's the JCM 800 amp, or then the Friedman, which is basically a Marshall type amp as well. And here's the EQ. High passing at around 100 and low pass at 10K. and then adding quite a bit of 8K to make them quite a bit brighter. Without. And here I have a multiband compressor for taming the palm mute parts, which come in here. Here it's basically doing nothing, but when the palm mute hits, it really starts working to tame them. And these two go to this main guitar bus here, which has another dynamic EQ to tame the low mids, and then a resonant or a notch filter here at 4K. Just to cut that piercing frequency. And then we have this intro guitar. Here's how it sounds dry. Quite a funny lick there. And here I'm really filtering it out, cutting a bunch of low end and high end. Kind of like that telephone sound. And then this channel strip. Not really doing anything except this high pass and low pass again. And here's the same tremolo plugin that I used on the synth with the same setting as well. Just to make that pulse. And here's the RC20 doing quite a bit. Some wobbling, distortion, quite a bit of reverb. I don't know what this is doing. And then some even more filtering EQ. So that's basically doing the whole sound. And then I'm sending that to the black hole reverb, to the hall reverb, to the dimension D for some chorusing and widening, as well as a dual delay. And with the synth layer, the synth is basically doing the higher octave there. Really subtle. And here in the last chorus, I just added another layer of guitar. Sounds like this. A real simple part. I believe it's the same amp as before. And then just cutting some lows and highs and a bit of 200 and boosting some high end. Without, with, and here I'm notching out a few frequencies. And that I'm sending to a doubler, which is kind of like that Van Halen thing. And all these guitars go to this guitar bus, which again have these notch filters here. And then lastly, we have the lead guitar. Here's the verse. Here's how it sounds dry. So here's the EQ. High pass at 150, cutting some 200, adding a tiny bit of highs. And a little bit of compression. And then just a safety limiter, which is basically doing nothing. And I'm sending that also to the doubler to make it more wide. And a tiny bit of room reverb, as well as plate reverb and some dual delay. I'm usually a sucker for delays and reverb, so these guitars are quite affected. And here's the chorus. And all these are the same settings, EQ wise and effect wise. And in the choruses, I usually like to add a few more layers. So here I double track the same melody here. Just to add a left and right layer with the lead. And then I double tracked a harmony, left and right. All together. And all these lead guitars go to this bus, which has these same notch filters and a little bit of a dynamic EQ in the low mids, and just a trim plugin for some volume control. And that's all the tracks. Not that many, if I'm honest, but it works. And then we have this master bus here. Let's quickly go through that. First, we have the bus compressor from SSL. Doing about 2 dB of gain reduction. Then a Pultec EQ, boosting a tiny bit of 3K. And another EQ, cutting some 400 and adding a tiny bit more 3K. And here we have the Filter Freak from Sound Toys, which is basically doing the automation in the intro and outro. In the outro, it's doing the opposite. And then the black box, which is a tube saturator for some more glue. And this plugin is just controlling some of the harshness. It's really subtle, but it's nice to have on the master. And then a clipper. I think I'm clipping about 1 dB here. Just to tame the whole mix a bit more before the final limiter. And then we have the ozone, kind of like the mastering plugin. Some finalizing EQ. Just super tiny moves here. bit of compression, some dynamic EQ, and the final limiter. Hitting about -9 LUFS. And this is just for my monitoring here. All right. So that was the whole session for the song Golden by HUNTR X. I hope you enjoyed the video, and let me know in the comments if you would like to see more of these kind of videos, if there's something you want me to focus more on or something I should skip completely. Yeah, let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon. Hej då!